Through centuries of growth, war, and calculated choices, the United States transformed from a young country to a world powerhouse. After World War II, it changed from isolationism to interventionism and built a global order, emerging as a major player in international politics and diplomacy. The most powerful nation in human history is the United States as it exists today. The United States has emerged as the head of a large, interconnected global system that has contributed to the onset of a period of unparalleled wealth and low levels of violence, thanks to its more than 800 military bases and 37% of worldwide military spending. It is necessary to go back to the country's founding, when America was not a global power in the traditional meaning of the word, to comprehend America's place in the world and why it is so important to world politics as we know it. Over the first 70 years of its existence, the United States' power and territory grew throughout North America, eventually reaching the Pacific Ocean. This expansionism led to the mass murder of the continent's indigenous population. However, there was a great deal of disagreement among early Americans about whether the nation should spread out across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Following the Civil War, this became a hot topic of discussion, as certain officials, such as Secretary of State Seward, believed that America should work to become a world power. Seward was successful in advancing a plan to buy Alaska from Russia, but Congress denied his ambitions to acquire Greenland, Iceland, and the Caribbean annexation area. This is due to a strong anti-imperialist inclination among some Americans, particularly many on Capitol Hill. These individuals were concerned that America would have to assimilate populations of inferior races and become more involved in international politics. Additionally, the imperialist desire to expand was significantly restrained by this opposition. However, there was a development in the late 19th century that would alter the discussion of American expansionism. The U.S. economy grew rapidly throughout the Industrial Revolution, necessitating a more centralized government and bureaucracy to oversee the expanding economy. It became simpler for expansionist presidents like William McKinley to unilaterally increase American influence overseas as power consolidated in the federal government. The pivotal moment occurred in 1898 when, despite strong opposition, President McKinley forced the nation into war with Spain over the island of Cuba. The waning Spanish Empire was decisively overthrown by the emerging U.S., which also took possession of the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam. The United States would annex American Samoa, Wake Island, and the Kingdom of Hawaii over the course of the following 2 years. A few years later, the United States acquired the American Virgin Islands, seized the Panama Canal Zone, and dispatched troops to occupy the Dominican Republic. The U.S. became known as a truly global power during this time of rapid territorial expansion. America also started utilizing its power to defend its expanding military and commercial interests overseas during this period, establishing pro-American governments in nations like Nicaragua and taking the lead in international diplomacy about the Western presence in China. The First World War demonstrated the extent of America's increasing might. President Wilson attended the Paris Peace Conference, which concluded the war and endeavored to establish the parameters of the peace, in addition to the fact that American intervention played a key role in its conclusion. He oversaw the League of Nations, an international organization created to advance world peace and cooperation, which was America's most ambitious foreign policy endeavor to date. The League, a comprehensive attempt to reshape world politics, demonstrated the extent of American foreign policy's ambition. However, isolationism remained a powerful influence in the U.S. Wilson's vision was doomed when Congress prevented the United States from entering the League of Nations. The United States was far more preoccupied with its own region than with European issues during the Great Depression and the ascent of Adolf Hitler. However, America was ultimately unable to completely avoid involvement in international politics due to its ever-increasing foreign entanglements. American troops and assets in East Asia were directly threatened by the expanding Japanese Empire, which led to war between the U.S. and Japan. As a result, the United States entered World War II with the Pearl Harbor attack. The Second World War would permanently alter America's position in the world. The United States was the only nation possessing atomic weapons and the only major power to escape economic collapse during the conflict. As a result, it was uniquely positioned to determine the conditions of the peace, which it used in an effort to avert another conflict. The United Nations establishment is the most well-known illustration of this. A system of international law that forbade wars of conquest, such as those fought by the Nazis and the Japanese, was established under the UN Charter. Additionally, it provided a platform for the global community to comment on and assist in resolving conflicts. In this manner, the Americans hoped big nations could settle their disagreements without resorting to war, but to compromise and the rule of law. Despite being the most well-known of the post-war organizations, the UN is not the only one. In a little New Hampshire retreat, 730 representatives from all 44 Allied countries gathered. Establishing a global financial system to avert another Great Depression and World War was their aim. The Bretton Woods Agreement that resulted eventually served as the foundation for the world financial system, leading to the creation of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. By establishing these organizations, the U.S. pledged to play a significant role in global issues. The problem, however, is that the Soviet Union, the second biggest force in the world, had a different perspective. In the struggle against Hitler, the Democratic West and the Communist East formed partners during World War II, but that alliance was short-lived. The United States' idea of a free trade world was directly threatened by Soviet development in Eastern Europe and beyond. The shadow of human regimentation has been dispersed by socialism to a substantial degree in one form or another over the majority of the world's countries, and the shadow is encroaching on our freedom. The U.S. and other European countries formed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a military alliance designed to prevent Russia from invading other European countries out of fear of Soviet intentions toward Western Europe. The United States adopted a global strategy known as containment, which got its name from its goal of preventing the development of communism everywhere in the world. The U.S. had to be influential everywhere, at all times, in this new global conflict. The enormous military apparatus built for World War II largely continued to function rather than being dismantled. The U.S. was drawn into improbable alliances with nations like Saudi Arabia, Israel, and South Korea, because it saw them as strongholds against communist encroachment in their regions. This had two major effects. Second, to limit Soviet influence, the U.S. started to interfere, frequently covertly, in dozens of nations. In some cases, like Iran, this meant supporting benevolent rulers. In other cases, like Afghanistan in 1979 and Nicaragua in 1985, it meant arming and funding insurgents. Due to the U.S.'s involvement in hundreds of international conflicts during the Cold War, it developed a complex web of alliances, conflicts, and connections in almost every region of the world. The U.S. had the option to leave this structure after the fall of the Berlin Wall, cutting off relations with its allies and reducing the strength of its military. And while the U.S. did military spending, most of the military architecture and alliances from the Cold Struggle survived. Presidents George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton concluded that it was in both America and the world's interests for the United States, now the lone superpower on Earth, to continue aggressively directing global affairs. We should be, and we must be, peacemakers. NATO, which was established only to oppose the Soviet Union, remained intact and even grew as a means of maintaining European unity when the Soviet menace was no longer present. Washington continued to help nations like Japan and Israel, supposedly to keep war from breaking out in those areas. Along with the American military and political commitments required to maintain them, the international structure of alliances and institutions established to maintain peace during the Cold War became permanent. With the possible exception of Donald Trump, no prominent American politician since the Cold War has made a serious push to dismantle this structure, which is still in place today. Regarding these pledges, Trump has made conflicting statements. However, he has continuously questioned the worth of free trade and claimed that America's friends are not paying it enough for its defense. That brings NATO and even the World Trade Organization into question. We will eventually have to admit that it would be better for us if Japan took precautions against this madman in North Korea. It would be better for us if South Korea began to defend itself. What about Saudi Arabia? Of course. This is more in line with the isolationism that preceded it, and a significant departure from the consensus that has governed U.S. foreign policy since 1945. Will President Trump implement some of the policies put forth by the candidate and undo decades of partnerships and institution building? Soon enough, we'll find out.